South Africa is deporting foreign nationals. And the headline sounds simple. Catch someone without lawful status, put them on a plane, problem solved. Neat, tidy, almost suspiciously tidy. But immigration is not a magic eraser. Behind every deportation number is a legal process, a border, a document, a court, a family, and usually at least one government office searching for a printer that works. So what is really happening? And can deportation fix the problems people are angry about? First, the words matter. A foreign national is simply someone who is not a South African citizen. An undocumented migrant is a person who cannot show valid permission to remain. An asylum seeker is asking for protection while that claim is being decided. A refugee has already been recognized as needing protection. And a criminal is a person convicted of a crime, not a synonym for foreigner, no matter how loudly a comment section types in capital letters. These categories can overlap in individual cases, but they are not interchangeable. South Africa sits inside a region where people have moved for work, safety, family, trade, and opportunity for generations. The country's mines, farms, factories, cities, and informal markets have long been connected to neighboring states. In the 2022 census, Statistics South Africa recorded more than 2.4 million international migrants, just above 3% of the total population. 86% came from the Southern African Development Community, or SADC. The largest shares among that group were from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Lesotho. That is a regional story, not an invasion movie trailer. Now to the number driving the headlines. The Department of Home Affairs says it carried out 109,344 deportations across the 2 financial years ending 31 March 2026. Its reported annual totals were 39,672 in 2023-24, 51,560 in 2024-25, and 57,784 in 2025-26. The department describes that as a 46% cumulative increase over the 2 years. Important distinction: 109,344 deportations is not the same thing as the number of undocumented people living in South Africa. One is a count of removals over time. The other is a much harder population question, and the census figure of 2.4 million includes international migrants generally, not undocumented migrants alone. So what happens when officials believe someone is unlawfully in the country? Police or immigration officers may request identity documents. If there are reasonable grounds to believe the person lacks lawful stay, the person may be arrested and detained for immigration purposes. People awaiting deportation are usually transferred to Lindela Repatriation Center in Gauteng, which UNHCR describes as South Africa's only immigration detention center. But detention is not supposed to mean disappear into a legal fog. UNHCR says detainees should be informed of the reasons, receive humane conditions and medical treatment, consult a lawyer, receive visits, and be separated from criminal suspects. The Constitutional Court has also required judicial oversight. A detained person must be brought before a court within 48 hours, and further detention must be tested against the interests of justice. Even the arrows need legal representation.
There is another line the law cannot simply skip: protection from return to a place where a person faces a reasonable risk of harm or death. This principle is called non-refoulement. UNHCR says asylum seekers and refugees may not be detained for deportation where that would violate this protection, while people whose asylum claims have been finally rejected and not challenged remain at risk of detention and deportation. Children face additional safeguards, and detention is meant to be a last resort. In other words, the system has a border control function, but it also has a constitutional and human rights brake pedal. The government says stronger enforcement is about restoring the rule of law. Home Affairs has credited initiatives including Operation New Broom, biometric verification, drones, body cameras, and the planned expansion of the electronic travel authorization system. From the state's perspective, better records and faster removals are meant to make the border more manageable. And yes, a country can enforce its immigration laws. The real question is whether enforcement is accurate, lawful, transparent, and aimed at the right category of person. Because a database that is wrong is just a very confident spreadsheet.
The anger is real. South Africa's official unemployment rate reached 33.6% in the second quarter of 2026, and youth unemployment is even more severe. Clinics, schools, housing, and public services can feel overloaded. In that pressure cooker, migrants become an easy political target. But a high unemployment rate does not prove that migrants caused it. Nor does a deportation total tell us how many jobs would appear the next morning if every removal happened. Structural unemployment, weak growth, inequality, public service failures, corruption, and regional poverty do not fit neatly into a bus heading to the border. Sadly, the bus does not accept complex policy solutions as luggage. This distinction became especially visible in the conflict over Operation Dudula, an anti-migrant movement that has checked documents and blocked access to some clinics and schools. In November 2025, the South Gauteng High Court ordered Operation Dudula and named leaders not to demand private people's documents, intimidate or harass foreign nationals, interfere with healthcare or schools, unlawfully evict people, or incite those actions. The court said only authorized officials can demand documents under Section 41, and that official checks require reasonable suspicion and are confined to public places. The ruling also directed the government to take steps against xenophobic hate speech and related intolerance. The message is simple: border control is a state function. A crowd with matching t-shirts is not a substitute for a warrant, a court, or a constitution. Numbers cannot show what a removal feels like. A deportation can separate a parent from a child, interrupt treatment, close a small business, or send a person back to a place where their work and family ties have changed. At the same time, South Africans living in underserved communities can feel abandoned when the state appears unable to control borders or deliver services fairly. Both realities can exist at once. That is why the responsible documentary does not ask viewers to choose between compassion and law. It asks whether the law is being applied consistently, whether people can challenge mistakes, and whether the public is being given evidence instead of slogans. Deportation can remove a person who has no lawful right to remain, and it can be part of a functioning immigration system. It can also be expensive, administratively slow, and vulnerable to mistakes if identity checks, asylum screening, detention, or court oversight fail. It cannot by itself create jobs, build clinics, stop corruption, fix documentation backlogs, or make neighboring economies prosper. The honest answer is less dramatic than a slogan. Enforcement may be necessary, but it is only one tool in a much larger policy toolbox. And unlike a toolbox, a country cannot solve everything by repeatedly throwing the same hammer at the border. So the truth behind South Africa's deportation debate is not that borders do not matter. It is that borders, rights, economics, and human lives are connected. The government reports rising removals. The law sets limits and safeguards. Communities feel real pressure. Migrants can be targeted by myths and vigilantism. If we want a serious answer, we need serious records, lawful enforcement, regional cooperation, and fewer shortcuts disguised as certainty. Because the loudest headline may fit on one line, but the truth needs the whole page. Subscribe for more explainers and tell us,